Yes.
There's Jason on video too. Okay.
Yeah.
I saw Kathy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kathy Fraser, representing Brooklyn Park.
I'm not sure if Corey's on, but Corey.
Yes.
There's Jason on video too. Okay.
Yeah.
I saw Kathy. Couldn't make it tonight.
Hello, everyone. I'm
Craig.
Kathy Fraser, representing Brooklyn Park.
Mr. Chair. I'm not sure if Corey's on, but Corey.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason,
There's Jason on video.
representing
too.
Robbinsdale.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw Kathy. Couldn't make it.
Hi, I'm Gene. I'm
Hello,
representing
everyone. I'm
Robbinsdale as
Kathy
well.
Fraser, representing Brooklyn Park.
Scott.
Hi, Scott Bourne, Golden Valley.
Chair. Not sure if Corey's on, but Corey.
Hey, all Felipe.
Hi, everyone, I'm Jason.
Valley.
There's Jason on video.
Representing
too.
Robbinsdale.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw Kathy. Couldn't make it.
Hi, I'm Gene. I'm
Hello,
representing
everyone. I'm
Robbinsdale as
Kathy
well.
Fraser, representing Brooklyn Park.
I did see Peggy Sue. Scott.
Hi, Scott Bourne, Golden Valley.
Chair. Not sure if Corey's on, but Corey.
Hey, all Felipe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason.
Valley.
There's Jason on video.
Representing
too.
Robbinsdale.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw Kathy. Couldn't make it.
Hi, I'm Gene. I'm
Hello,
representing
everyone. I'm
Robbinsdale as
Kathy
well.
Fraser, representing Brooklyn Park.
I did see Peggy Sue. Scott.
Hi, Scott Bourne, Golden Valley.
Chair. Not sure if Corey's on, but Corey.
Hey, all Felipe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason.
Valley.
There's Jason on video.
Representing
too.
Robbinsdale.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw Kathy. Couldn't make it.
Hi, I'm Gene. I'm
Hello,
representing
everyone. I'm
Robbinsdale as
Kathy
well.
Fraser, representing Brooklyn Park.
I did say
Everybody, Adam Hutchins.
Hi, Scott Bourne, Golden Valley.
Not sure if Corey's on, but Corey.
Hey, all Felipe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason.
Valley.
There's Jason on video.
Representing
too.
Robbinsdale.
Okay.
Yeah.
I saw Kathy. Couldn't make it.
Hi, I'm Gene. I'm
Hello,
representing
everyone. I'm
Robbinsdale as
Kathy
well.
Fraser, representing Brooklyn Park.
I did say
Everybody, Adam Hutchins.
Hi, Scott Bourne, Golden Valley.
Not sure if Corey's on, but Corey.
Hey, all Felipe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason.
Valley.
Not here.
Representing Robbinsdale. Yeah.
I saw Kathy. Couldn't make it.
Hi, I'm Gene. I'm
Hello,
representing
everyone. I'm
Robbinsdale as
Kathy
well.
Fraser, representing Brooklyn Park.
I did say
Everybody, Adam Hutchins.
Hi, Scott Bourne, Golden Valley.
Not sure if Corey's on, but Corey.
Hey, all Felipe.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jason.
Not here.
Representing Robbinsdale. Yeah.
Move into the approval of meeting minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second the motion.
All in favor?
Yeah.
Hi.
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 I don't think, I mean, we don't have to like technically do a roll call unless there's a lot of people dissenting on approval of these minutes.
Yeah, and hopefully we wouldn't be disagreed about the minutes. Like we'll write them in a way that everybody's cool with it.
Okay.
Cool. Sorry, I just muted myself real quick. We had people come to the door, dog barking, chaos. So with that, we have kind of the three main agenda items. A little bit of a schedule update, kind of a LRT systems overview, and then a little bit about the anti-displacement working group. So kicking it off to Dan to start us on a little bit of a schedule update.
Thanks, Sam, and good evening, everybody. Happy to have you here with us tonight as we talk a little bit about next steps and what we're going to be doing over the next number of months. So I'm going to be up in these two. I'm going to be up in these two top boxes that you see on the screen today, talking about how we're pulling together our project goals and criteria for evaluation over the next several months, and kind of the technical work that we'll be doing around right-of-way and stations and engineering analysis, the technical work around doing and working on these alignment alternatives. And then Sam's going to talk a little bit about anti-displacement and community benefits in that area down there. So as we turn to summer, though it doesn't feel like summer out there today, as we turn to summer, we expect that June, July, and August is going to be real busy for us as a working group. And so this chart, which you've seen many times and which we'll continue to use, shows the extent of our work on this reanalysis of the Blue Line Extension project, starting late last year and at the early part of this year, kind of re-pulling the project team together, developing project principles for moving from a LRT alignment utilizing BNSF right-of-way to one that does not. And we're right kind of in the middle of that work right now as we enter May. We've put together principles. We've laid out initial options for route studies and where we might be able to build this. And we're right now in the middle of this work. May, June, July, and August will be a lot about, on the technical side, a lot about evaluating issues, evaluating impacts, looking at how LRT will fit in the various configurations along the routes that are optimal for building light rail on it, and see if we can't continue to work down and use some evaluation criteria to narrow us down to a community supported, acceptable LRT route to advance through the environmental impact statement work. So that's where we are. We're kind of in the middle there in that tier 1 work. On the next slide, you'll see some things that are informing us going forward. We did hear from folks that maybe we could leave the survey and the interactive map open a little longer. We've agreed to do that. So that interactive map and our survey will be open through the end of May to continue to, gather more community input. We had, how many surveys responded to, Sophia? 1,000 yet?
Yeah, over 1,000.
Over 1,000.
And we have paper surveys that we haven't necessarily pulled into the system yet. So we've
had a lot of comments on our interactive map. And so we're gathering up a lot of data. We want to continue to do that. Our public engagement cohort has added some interpretive services to put some different languages out there and to continue to gather information. And of course, as you know, April was a tough month, especially in and around this quarter. We had the shooting in Brooklyn Center. We had the trial wrap up. We've had just continued issues with the pandemic and COVID. So it's been a very community intensive month of April. And so just knowing that, we're kind of continuing to gather more information and give people more time. The more information we get, the more collaborative we can be. It helps us develop what will be a fairly comprehensive, hopefully, report on this route selection process. So the next slide kind of shows upcoming advisory committees. This is you guys and others on what will happen coming up. And you'll see a lot of technical information here. By June's meeting, we hope to have assembled quite a set of visualizations along kind of cuts through the corridor on West Broadway in Minneapolis, on Lowry, on Washington, on 81 through Robbinsdale, on County Road 81 through Crystal, that will give a real world look at what does a segment of any of those roadways and adjacent properties look like today, and what might it look like with various configurations of LRT. We'll put some side running, some center running, some elevated sections on those various cut throughs so that we can start to answer some of the questions a lot of people have said. What will be left of the roadway if we put LRT in the middle of roadway A, B, or C? What might an elevated section look like compared to the adjacent buildings? Will buildings have to be purchased, or will there be adequate space available to keep sidewalks in place and adequate lane configurations? Those will kind of give us a guide. We'll put a bunch of those, as many of those together as kind of result in changing sections as we move along the piece. Adam, looks like you had a question. You want to go ahead and ask that?
Hey, thank you, Dan. So when you said the elevated section potentials, you had said, or it had been said earlier in a previous meeting, that the elevated would be too expensive and a couple other things why they weren't going to do elevated. Is that still on the table, especially in the zone 3?
Well, I think, well, zone 3 up in Brooklyn Park.
Sorry, I gotta get it inversed. I'm sorry, I'm inversed.
Oh, sorry. Zone 3 being, sure. I mean, I think it is, Adam, one of the things we want to at least see. Sure, it's a lot more expensive, but is it really? What do we gain from it? What is the benefit of putting it up? So one of the things we'll be able to see is what's the footprint of an at-grade LRT versus what's the footprint of an elevated section? Because it's not 30 feet versus 0, right?
Yep.
I mean, there's still peer support and things like that. Also, where do stations go? How do people access them? I mean, so we don't want to necessarily take any of that off the table. At some point, you do a cost benefit analysis and say, is this the right context to do? Is this what we're looking for here? Do we really want that alternative? So cost will be a evaluation criteria, but it won't. But I don't know that we'll necessarily take it away. I might not say the same about tunnels. Tunnels can be very expensive, and then other thing we're going to do some research on, and might as well just talk about this now, is, building a tunnel, assuming you're not direct boring this thing, what does a cut and cover tunnel take up in terms of space just to build it, right? I mean, we might be all the way building face to building face just to move utilities around and build it. And then, what those costs are significantly higher in terms of both operating costs and construction costs. And so those discussions will be ongoing.
The one thing that a city council person in Minneapolis had brought up is if elevated is going to be conceptually drawn, could we have some sort of green space? So say it went center running elevated down either Lowry or Broadway, could there be a green space, bike lane, pedestrian friendly corridor directly beneath it? Could that be in the concept drawings?
Sure. So, no, we won't put that necessarily in the, we'll these will be more spatial, not final design. Okay. But I can already think of the questions. What is the reason you're elevating it so you can save more street? Well, then to not have the use of the street underneath, or is it because of safety? So all of those things will be part of it. That what the end result conditions are will be based on kind of both traffic conditions plus community input plus what people really want to see in terms of what the end result corridor looks like.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Dan, can I say something really quick? Adam, I know it's come up a lot in our conversations around Robbinsdale. People have asked a lot about elevated tunnels. And so I don't know if our conversation spurred that, but I know from a city standpoint, and a lot of residents have asked about what about elevated options? And I think that was at least in area 2 was definitely a lot of the feedback was just around what does that look like? Can we see something like that?
That's correct, Jason. That was part of that spurred it. We also had a meeting with City Council last week. Adam mentioned City Council. Councilmember Ellison talked a little bit about what about the potential for some elevated. We've been getting those questions.
Yeah.
That's we'll look at it. We'll look, what is the footprint? What is it? How does it feel in terms of the context of what's adjacent to it? How would we serve stations? What happens underneath it? All those are questions that we would talk about. Yeah.
I think people see that elevated portions of the Green Line expansion because there are so many precast elevated girder systems and flyovers and stuff like that. They wonder, price is obviously the issue, but we just don't. The question has been asked of me, why can we afford it on the Green Line expansion run and not in North Minneapolis? That was an explicit question.
That's a good point, Adam. And we definitely, the first cut is that what's the right way to go in terms of best serving the community? Because I will say, and some people will agree with me about this, I have seen operate ridden on and been part of constructing a lot of miles of at-grade street running LRT. And my own personal opinion is I think it works. I think it is, if built correctly, I think it fits into the transportation system fine. And so, but that doesn't mean that that's the only choice of what there is to build.
Hey, Dan, this is Gene. I have a question.
Okay.
Specific to Robbinsdale, let's just for the sake of talking say that there's going to be an elevated through Robbinsdale. Okay, so what about accessibility? Because is there going to be a parking space? I know this is premature, but I'm more concerned about accessibility. So can you address that if it's elevated through Robbinsdale?
Accessibility to the line itself?
Yeah.
Well, so we have to have a way to get people to it, right? And so now you get into where is it? If it's center running LRT and you don't have skyways that come from the side over the road, then you've got to have a way to get to it from the center of the road, which means you're building elevators out in the center of the road as well as steps. We know, I mean, if you go to Dallas has got some beautiful elevated sections with these really nice outdoor escalators that go right up. We can't build outdoor escalators in Minnesota. That just doesn't work, which means we're stuck with stairs and elevators or somehow getting across from elevated sections. So will it have to be fully accessible? Absolutely. Do we know how we'll do it? Highly dependent on where's it located, center running, side running, against the street, how will we get people to it?
So Dan, this is Catherine. I have a quick question for you. I think I asked before, is there no possibility of doing West Broadway and Lowry?
Together, both projects?
Well, I'm not sure why you're calling it two projects. It would be
sorry, LRT on both routes. Is it possible? Yes. Is it financially feasible? That's not a question for me to answer. I don't know that. I think one of the problems, Catherine, is with regard to ridership, they're awfully close together to justify from a ridership standpoint the cost of building both that serve not exactly the same, but very close proximity to each other. So I think the likelihood of LRT on both corridors is probably very, very small.
Okay. All right, because we want economic development for West Broadway and for Lowry, and that's why
I understand. Yep.
Both corridors. And just to the elevation point, we've already discussed elevation when we were talking about Van White and the possible negative impact it would have on at-grade businesses. So that's another aspect we would look at when we're talking about elevation.
Also true. So this discussion we're having, while it's wonderful and robust, it's like 1 month too early. Okay. So we're going to have some exhibits, we'll have some drawings, and we'll dig deep into all these things. I think, Gene, your question about accessibility and questions about how to access it and impacts to adjacent properties, all part of what we want to do as we move through in June.
Dan, I was just also going to offer up too for the group here today. Nick, when we get to Nick's presentation, we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like on the existing system. So know that you probably have some further questions, but we've got some pretty good pictures of the existing system when we talk about this too. So just know that that's also coming up in a few slides.
Another thing that Sam's is saying to me very quickly is, Dan, if you don't quit taking questions, you will engage with everybody and 2 hours will be over and it'll feel like you just had a good discussion, because that's kind of how I roll. So people need to keep me on task. Thank you, Sam. We do have a bunch of stuff we want to share. Well, the other thing we're going to do in June is start to bring to you guys and our other groups some of the things we want to use to help start to evaluate these various corridors against themselves and the viability of building it and each other. And so we'll start kind of laying that on. And then, what are other quantitative or qualitative things that you folks think are good ways to look at these alignments and routes against each other? So as we get that set, July is when we really want to start to, for the first time, take that great big step from a line on a map that shows West Broadway or Lowry or 81, and now start to show the actual roadways themselves and what LRT routes would look like on those streets. And that, Catherine, is where, when I look at some of your questions, it'll be under that time where we'll really start to know about impacts to adjacent properties. Where are there pinch points? Where are there spots where homes will be impacted either directly because simply it's not wide enough and we have to widen and potentially purchase a property, to it's not so wide that we have to purchase a property, but now the street gets a little closer to a home or to a business. And what is an adequate sidewalk width to leave in the after condition? How many lanes do we need? Where do we need turn lanes? Where do the stations go? All of those specific details will tell us a lot about potential right-of-way impacts and where we can, we may say, listen, there's enough impact here that instead of having businesses or residences on two sides of a road, impacted 3/4 each, maybe we will move the alignment over and save one completely and impact just a building on one side. And then which side does that make sense on? And where is there development happening versus not new development? And how do we also not completely wiggle this thing through the corridor, but kind of provide a uniform alignment and route through there? All of that will be, I see us in July rolling out maps either in person or virtually, and really starting to roll up our sleeves on what these pieces can look like. And that's going to be real exciting stuff. That'll be good fun. And then as we move into August, that doesn't happen in 1 month. Look at a map and we're done. So we'll identify a bunch of things to analyze and then bring those back in August, and then further continue to evaluate different engineering and technical issues that'll help inform how we start to put our draft report together that kind of rolls up and the analysis that we do and pull together through this work. So we'll meet. I mean, if folks think that, maybe we can do part of the quarter one night, we may have to add a meeting in and put some pieces. We'll kind of take our guidance from you guys as much as you want to really get into the nuts and bolts of what this looks like. I
clicked you ahead too fast. We did talk about potential station locations.
Oh,
sorry, Dan.
Yes.
Sometimes if I touch my mouse, it advances too. So don't want to lose that one.
Yes. So that is, July will be starting to say how many stations, how many is too many? How many is not enough? Where are the key destination points? How do we make sure we're not stopping every block, but at the same time we're serving, responsibly the areas that need service? And station locations can become quite a detailed piece. We spent a long time with stations on Central Corridor, and we've got a lot of success happening around stations along that alignment. And so they can breed very successful opportunities in the future. So, and then as we get through the summer, we'll start to get our report pulled together and start to work with our groups about how this happens. So, Catherine, what are you saying about how many cars on the trains?
Don't get me started, Dan. We said we weren't going to go any further. So
okay.
That will help determine what those stops are, depending upon how long the train is.
We'll be designing everything for 3-car trains,
which is about a city block. So
because boy, if you go to longer than 3-car trains, you got to close a lot. First of all, you can't operate downtown because you'd be blocking every intersection. But we're not going to design them for 2-car trains because then we're building them bigger in the future. So.
You're getting him into my presentation, Catherine. You know that.
So, Sophia, I'm going to turn this over to you to talk about community input, but I'm very excited for what'll be. I mean, this group is really fun to engage on these topics with, and we'll have some robust and exciting discussions in the future.
Yeah, no, we actually, well, we try to keep things moving. We also really, really appreciate the discussion and the questions as they come up. So, anyways, kind of continuing along, just so I hope everybody's kind of seen a little bit, even if it's not 100% clear, that, you know, as we are getting feedback from the community, we are trying to bring forth what helps push these questions forward and answers what's going on. And while we will, you know, take kind of official comments through the end of May, it doesn't mean that we're not already looking at analyzing and talking about what we're receiving and, you know, kind of bringing that forward. And so, you know, I hope kind of as our schedule shows and what Dan went over a little bit is that some of those things that we're trying to answer through the summer are the main things that people have asked us or brought up in terms of, you know, what could this look like in my community? What are these impacts? I can't really make a decision until I know. Let's talk about them, you know, et cetera, et cetera. What about, you know, an elevated section? You know, so we don't want to, as that stuff comes up, we don't want to not address it, right? We want to bring it forth and discuss it. So that is what we hope to accomplish in the summer. And so right now, you know, one of our open questions as we released West Broadway and Lowry was, are we missing anything? And does this feel right? Should we have taken a look at other things? And we've heard, you know, little pieces and suggestions here or there. There hasn't been, you know, like any kind of overwhelming suggestions, but stuff for us to definitely respond to in specifically. Analyzing suggested station locations, got a lot of that. And then community issues and opportunities identified by the community. So that can be, we've just gotten over the last few days about almost 100 comments on the map, interactive map that identify specific community assets. You know, so whether they're cultural destinations or businesses owned by, you know, specific communities or things like that. So we're looking at that, we're putting it together, and then the project goals really help us then bounce off that evaluation criteria. And so just wanted to say everything that we are hearing from all of you and all the efforts, both in public meetings and with our online stuff, we're bringing it forward and making it part of what we do. I would be remiss this month to not highlight some pretty awesome events that many of you on the call helped us put together. And you know, we've been out and about, but some of the events, whether it was the Robbinsdale listening session or Seeds to Heart, coming and talking to the Seeds to Harvest, were things that we really appreciated, and we got, I think, some really awesome discussion out of, and even just getting out into the world. So a million thank yous with those efforts, and we're out and about trying to get as many places as we can, and whether that's, you know, vaccination sites or festivals or groups like that. So just want to highlight that effort and really thank all of you for that. We're starting to plug in our May calendar. This list is really going to grow. But we're going to do a check-in with the chambers in Robbinsdale, kind of getting out to some of the Minneapolis neighborhoods. And Commissioner Lundy is also hosting a really cool event on Facebook. So this list is actually probably like this long, but just wanted to highlight some of the activities that we have coming up. We never haven't, can always schedule more, it seems. That's always the goal. We love to be where we can be all the time. So just a little bit, you know, we talked about the schedule in terms of kind of the engineering technical advancement. And so I want to pull that back a layer and talk a little bit about how that feeds into our engagement plan. And this is also where you all are, you know, we welcome your input. And so we know over the summer we're bringing out more pieces of information. So having being places, whether that's community events or pop-ups, and catching people as they're existing in their community is something we want to do. The cohort that Joan Joan leads is also been out at many events. We want to continue having those community specific meetings because, as Dan kind of pointed out, you get into some of these technical details, and it's actually really nice to have both the big group and the small group discussion. In June, we don't want to also lose the stuff that Sam's going to talk about later with the anti-displacement efforts. And in that July timeframe, as we start to show impacts, we want to talk specifically to the individuals that we might be showing impacts on, even if they're like more minor or things like that. We want to have that conversation. Those are major stakeholders for us, as well as continuing this corridor-wide discussion with folks about these details. So that's a little bit about our gig. And last thing I touch on quickly before I hand it off to Nick is reminder: we have about 14 organizations that are also kind of in the weeds with us. In addition to our advisory committees, they're charged with doing some engagement. And just specific to the cohort, some feedback that we've heard is what Dan acknowledged before. Just April had a lot of stuff going on, whether that was attacks on our Asian community to a whole set of trials and whatnot, and all that kind of stuff. We really need translated materials. We're getting a system that's kind of like better to get things turned around faster in terms of translated materials, and a little bit more about the big picture. So, how everything fits together, what our timelines are, kind of how we make decisions. We're trying to bring that forward to you all as well. And to not forget the historic perspective. And with that also comes different levels of engagement with the project. I know there's folks on this call that could probably walk through many years of history on this committee, and so know the LRT. Some of the stuff that we'll cover next is fairly like, oh, we've heard this a bunch, but there's others that we're all just getting used to what LRT is. So just being aware of that. Okay, with that, turning it over to Nick to do a little bit of a systems overview.
All right. Well, thanks, Sophia. And from the discussion rolling into this, I think we're going to have a lot of questions coming out of it, but hopefully we answer some of the questions too. This is going to be just an overview of kind of LRT, how it works, and kind of base it on our elements from our existing system. So want to jump to the next slide, please. Thanks, Sophia. So this is a good basis here to start with our high frequency map. So this is the light rail, both the existing lines and proposed lines for light rail and for some of the BRT routes, or for the BRT routes along here. So you start to see how we're filling in a transit system here with high frequency, fast, fairly permanent routes through here with LRT and BRT segments. So, and you can see how the LRT kind of acts as a good backbone, with the green line coming from St. Paul into Minneapolis, and the blue line coming up from the south, from Mall of America into downtown Minneapolis, and then how the extensions, the green line extension underway out to Eden Prairie, and then the blue line, our proposed blue line extension here, how it kind of makes a good crisscross of the Twin Cities. And then the other lines going through here are BRT lines that are either existing or proposed, and how they start filling in that whole network. So the whole purpose is to build a robust system that's fast and reliable, and has good amenities such as stations and off platform ticketing, so to make things go quicker. So next map, please. So I want to talk a little bit. We get a lot of questions about why don't we do something like light rail, or like North Star, or how come it doesn't operate elevated like Chicago. So here's some slides just to discuss a little bit about the different operating modes, and although they're all rail related, the rails are actually different. So the first slide here is our North Star system. It's a commuter rail, and it runs on existing freight rail railroad from Big Lake down into Minneapolis. Stationing on that is typically 2 to 5 miles apart, so quite a good station separation between stations. Moving over into light rail, light rail, again, as we've had these discussions, this is a photo showing us going down through on University Avenue through or on Green Line, and light rail station a little bit closer together than the commuter rail. Half a mile to a mile station is a good rule of thumb. A half mile when we're in more of those dense downtown areas where we have more destinations to go to, and then as we pull out a little bit farther, some of those stations become about a mile apart. The running way here, the guideway that we run on, is mostly dedicated. We do share a little bit of space with buses, particularly at the Washington Avenue through the U of M. So there's a dedicated transit way there with the light rail going through there. Buses will go onto that rail guideway also, and then off to the side there's space for bikes and emergency vehicles. But that's about the only case of where it's really a shared operation on that guideway. And the two lines that we have in place are the existing green and blue lines, with green line being under construction. Now, another form is a streetcar. Riverview is something that they're looking at right now and evaluating the viability of that. With streetcars, it's getting closer to a more like a bus system. Although it's on rail, it's mixed with traffic, so it's going through the traffic lanes. The vehicles may be pretty much the same vehicle as a light rail vehicle, but then they have to start putting different safety elements onto them, like brake lights, because they're running in traffic that a light rail doesn't have, a light rail vehicle doesn't. Station spacing is a lot closer together. Typically a quarter mile to a half a mile, because you're more in that downtown, more dense area running with this. And then as we roll over, we have a photograph. This is not our system, but this is a picture of the L in Chicago, where this is heavy rail. Heavy rail it has the third rail for electrification to power it. So they take it. It's either usually a subway or elevated up. So there's not that chance or the hazard of getting that third rail, vehicle or people in it. And like Dan said, I think Dan mentioned too, our light rail vehicles are when we have a 3-car consist together, so that means 3 cars joined together, they're meant to fit within a city block. The length is about 270 feet, they're 90 feet each. Where heavy rail, they'll stick a lot of cars together because they're moving a lot of people, like New York or Chicago. And some of those consists are well over a block long, 400 or 500 feet long. So when that train would stop at a station, it's blocking multiple intersections, so that wouldn't be a good thing. So hence why it's elevated. Let's move on to the next slide. So I think, Catherine, hopefully this will get to some of your questions out there. Right now, our light rail system operates from about 5 a.m. in the morning till midnight, so we do not operate 24 hours on that. Some of that is backed down a little bit from COVID service. With reduced service through there, but also they've backed down, not to have full 24-hour service, so we can actually do maintenance and repairs on the system and get out there and work on tracks and some of that downtime and take care of things that's hard to do when there's trains operating there. So our operation now for Blue Line is going to be to connect to Brooklyn Park, Crystal, Robbinsdale, Minneapolis, and from Minneapolis, it's the Blue Line extension. The Blue Line goes all the way down to Bloomington, the Mall of America. So, this project right now has been identified. We are moving forward that this is a light rail system. So our hours of operation frequency. So during rush hour, I already talked about the 5 a.m. to midnight time frame, but during rush hours, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then in the evening from 3 to 6:30. We run on 10-minute headways, so those trains are coming through that station every 10 minutes. So if you don't have to worry about getting that exact bus or express bus that has very limited hours. It's running every 10 minutes. So if you get to the station and you've missed a train, another one's going to be coming through in 10 minutes, and you can get on that. When we have later evening, weekend, or holiday hours, sometimes that service will be back down. To 20 or 30-minute headways. Our fares are the same as on light rail as our bus services. Our regular transit buses. So $2 fare non-rush hour, and at rush hour they're $2.50. When you get a ticket, it's good for 2.5 hours. It's transferable, so you can go from a light rail to a bus and vice versa. And then there are reduced fares for youth, senior, and Medicare card holders. So next slide. One of the things about light rail is the environmental benefits, because the light rail does run on electric, so you know it's a easier way to get clean energy and run off of clean energy than a combustion vehicle. But what we're showing here in this graph is an APTA study showing that, you know, basically a per passenger mile releases about a third of the CO2 that a regular single occupancy car would have. So talking a little bit about what our vehicles can carry, a 3-car consist can carry up to 270 passengers in it. So that's 270 passengers every 10 minutes going on that vehicle through there, you know, compared to, you know, 1.5 or 1.7 passengers per car making that same trip. So and it does encourage sustainable land use, you know, around the stations. It starts bringing development into these high frequency transit ways. So it focuses more of the development around the stations, around that light rail. Let's talk a little bit about how we operate. So there's a couple pictures here and some of the tracks and maybe get a little bit more into your question, Catherine, about express trains. So how we operate again on a dedicated guideway. So in some areas where there's a lot of traffic, you know, for instance, the downtown area, we run on embedded tracks. So that's the rail is embedded into concrete around it. It works well for those scenarios, but you know, it's harder to maintain. If you have a rail break, you have to chip out concrete, fix the rail, put it back, put all the concrete back in place, and it can be quite time consuming. For a lot of our system, you know, when we're not running through downtown, the bottom right-hand picture shows a blue line train running there, and that's embedded track. So that's the typical ballasted track that you would see on a railroad with it in there. So it's easier to maintain, it's easier to set grades, adjust things, fix track through that on that embedded track. The other upside of the non-embedded or the ballasted track is, you know, it maybe discourages people from using that track as the shortcut. On embedded track with the concrete, I've seen bikes riding down it because it seems like a really good place to with limited cars on it to ride your bike, which is not a good idea. And I actually have a picture somewhere of somebody pushing a stroller down the guideway. So those are some of the safety concerns of having that something that looks like a nice sidewalk. Again, the picture on the right-hand side shows overhead electric line. That's what the trains run on. They need to be in contact with that overhead catenary system to run. That's what runs the electric motors of the train. And then we should talk a little bit about too that we're in, as we're talking center running here. So this is University Avenue. What we find best for operations, and we should reiterate what Dan said too, is really at grade seems to serve our customers best. The train is right there in the community. It's easy to get to the stations and from the stations and across with limited infrastructure. You know, that we don't have to have elevators and stairs and to try to get to it. It's conveniently we put safe access into the stations or crossing the tracks in dedicated areas. But center running seems to work best with traffic because the train is running with that heavy through movement of traffic. So as the train's going through an intersection, that through traffic can go with the train and operate with the train. So it helps with traffic systems. Now, I think the question on the express train, because we're on a track, it's really hard to. We don't have a lot of switches or crossings, you know, so you can get around a train. So really, it's operationally it's not functional to have an express train because it would need to get around the trains that are already on the track, and it would save a little bit of time, but I'm not sure a lot. I mean, typically a train has a dwell time of about 30 seconds at a station. So they're usually in the station, they pick up the passengers and go pretty quickly. Next slide, please. So this slide is side running, which we have in the system also. This is a slide showing blue line along Hiawatha Avenue. And I think one of the big reasons that this was side running is Hiawatha Avenue was built before light rail was in place, but the right of way had been left over by MnDOT for transit through this area. So it's probably one of the bigger reasons it's side running through here. It does work well in certain places, but it tends to, maybe compete. It adds another more phases to a signal system, so it can slow down the traffic in the intersections a little bit more than a center running. Next slide, please. Some of the stations that we have out there. So our preferred station is a center shared platform station. So it's one station that takes care of both directions of travel. So if you're getting on a blue train, whether you're going east or west or north or south, you would go to that one station platform and get to the train that's going the direction you need to. And it's helpful when we're doing repairs on the line, or sometimes we reverse run so we can switch the direction of travel on those tracks if we're doing maintenance on another track. And so we can keep sending the customers to the same place. Now, a split platform is an example of quite a few stations we have along Central Corridor. And in this slide on the right-hand side, you can see on either side of the intersection is a station for either eastbound or westbound. So that this helps with when we're limited or constrained on space, or you need to get traffic, movements in their left turns in this instance. That helps get into that limited space a little bit better. But you can see if somebody goes to the wrong station and they need to go to the other side, they got to make quite a few movements to get over to the right side, to the other side, the other platform that they need to be at. Next slide, please.
You have some questions in chat, Nick.
Okay, let's stop and take a look at these here. So
You have one about the kind of just the time and lessons learned from needing to stop at lights on green line. Was the first one.
That might be a Dan Solar question, or a resident traffic engineer, but I'm not sure if we have an exact time that we stopped at lights. But the trains are meant to, we have predictive priority on them. So the trains, for the most part, should go through a signal when it's green. So we shouldn't be stopped at a lot of red lights. And when they're at the station, there's a there's a system that kind of lets the train know, the signal know when the train's leaving the station. So the timing of the signal should be green as the train's coming through the intersection. But Dan,
I mean, when we opened the green line in June 2014, I'd spent many years getting ready for opening day, and then all of a sudden here we go, and we had all this technology out there, and we were stopping at like 3/4 of the traffic signals, and causing a lot of delay, especially, as those routes, the traffic signals are right upstream from the downstream platforms. We were stopping at red lights and then going into the station platform. Now, we were never meant to have true preemption where the train was always taking over the traffic signal, but we expected a lot better operation. So we went to work, and over the next 6 months, we made a lot of adjustments into signal timing, and we really utilized what we had out there in terms of advanced detection, where we were starting to, we were detecting a train 3 or 4 signals ahead, and then trying to, and better and more accurately predicting when it would arrive so that the signal would be ready for the train when it got there. And we took it down significantly to now, not always, but the number of stops is significantly reduced. So that's part of what you end up doing with in-street running, is finding, if we can let the traffic signal know in advance when the train's going to get there, and if if that predicted time when it actually arrives is relatively close every time, you can really minimize stops because you can get the signal serving vehicles but ready for the train when it gets there.
Dan, this is Scott. That's really helpful. I had always wondered whether this is kind of a hard-coded problem with center running that you just couldn't get around, or whether it was kind of a solvable technology problem with learnings and data and metrics and all those things that you could improve it over time. Because I mean, lots of folks on the phone would probably say the same thing. I mean, the joke of, all of my kind of cohort when that line went was it was quicker to get on your bike and ride to St. Paul than it was to get on that train.
Well,
and I know, between Minneapolis and St. Paul, I know that has drastically improved, but boy, the early days on that, it did seem like it was stopping at every single stoplight, and it would take you an hour to get to St. Paul. So
it did. It was we were predicting a 37-minute run time, and we were in the mid to upper 50s, and we just said, "Whoa, what's going on?" And so, and in fact, Brian Lamb, who was the general manager of Metro Transit at the time, worked in Minneapolis, but had a lot of meetings in St. Paul, and he would literally ride that thing and record every time it stopped and for how long, and then he would send me all that data like every day. And so, but what we're not able to do is we're not able to simply call LRT a freight railroad. In other words, put up gates and then bring down those gates, stop everybody, and let the train go straight through. Nobody was going to allow us to do that. And when I mean county, city of St. Paul, Ramsey County, Hennepin County, it needed to be part of the system, but we needed to minimize where it would stop. And the best way we could do that was find out early when it was going to get there, and then use the technology and the traffic signal controller to remember, it should be easy, right? Because when east-west green is on, or in this case, when north-south 81 or north-south-west Broadway are green, the train can go through with it. So just make sure it's part of that time. You can do that if you get that in advance. So we know those things now. We've learned a lot. And so as we design these in the future, if we're at grade running in the center, we will put the proper infrastructure in place to allow us to use that data. Also, this whole issue of traffic signal controllers talking to each other by fiber has come like 1,000 times in the future better than it was back 15, 20 years ago. So we're really able to do a lot more things.
Thank you.
So I see another question here about just a simple one about right-of-way. Yeah, University Avenue right-of-way is typically 110 to 120 feet wide there. That's why we have why there's 4 lanes of traffic on University Avenue. So right now, West Broadway, Lowry Avenue, we're in that quite a bit narrower, 75 to 85 feet width in there. So a little bit of difference in right-of-way width. And just going through here, just a couple other questions. So Catherine, we'll talk a little bit about issues with station lights and signage, and we can get to that. What's the estimated run time to target campus from downtown? So I think Dana brought that up earlier. When in our last
I brought that up, Nick. Peggy
Yeah.
Sue was listening. She answered Philippe's question. That's great. Thanks, Peggy Sue.
Yeah, I see that now. That popped up. Thank you. Thanks. So, but we will do time to travel studies as we get going forward. So, jumping forward here, we get a lot of questions. This gets into our structures discussion, but just interesting enough, in our existing lines, the blue line and the green line out there, there's only 2 stations out of 36 stations in our system that are not at grade stations. So some of those stations, for instance, Franklin Avenue is on a bridge, but you still can access it on both ends from grade. So all other than the airport, which is in a tunnel. So obviously the airport is the terminals in the middle of the airfield. So to get to that airport, it needed to be in a tunnel because we wouldn't really want to run the train across the runways. So came through in a tunnel. For space constraints, that station is in a tunnel beneath the airport in that location. But you know, it goes down that tunnel pretty quickly when it gets to the airfield, and then comes out pretty quickly also and starts running at grade. The other example here is elevated is Lake Street Station, and as Lake Street is following Hiawatha in this location, Hiawatha goes over Lake Street on a bridge. So the train there kind of follows that same profile. So we're up on an elevated platform at this location too. So you need to either take stairs or an elevator to get up to it. But just interesting, out of all those stations, those are the only two that are not at grade. Let's talk a little bit more about some of our stations. This is a rendering that we had for 85th and Broadway up in Brooklyn Park, and just kind of showing what, you know, a center running center platform station looks like. And for the plans that we have a standard or a typical footprint for these stations. So, you know, all the amenities on that station are in the same place, whether it's the ticket vending machine or the go-to card readers, or where the signage and is all in the same place. You know, they are customizable by you know, maybe changing up the architecture on the facade a little bit, or changing the color of the stations. But you know, if you're going from one station to the next, we have a standard platform on those stations. I also want to kind of point out, and as we get to those stations, and a center running station, you know, typically the best access is at an intersection. That's where you want to get people across, where there's signals, where we can stop traffic and get pedestrian signals to cross. So we really work on enhancing the safety through that area to make sure that you know, our crossings are you know, pretty compact, so you're not traveling across or walking across massive expanse of traffic lanes. In the middle, we're able to offer pedestrian refuge with additional buttons, so you can push a button in that location to cross the road, or you know, if you're going all the way across and not going to the station, and you only get halfway through, that you can push the button to recall that PED signal to go back across too. So we want to really work on pedestrian bike safety and multimodal connections at these stations. Next slide, please. This is an example of a center platform station on the Green Line. This is at Prospect Park area on University Avenue, where 29th comes into University Avenue. So this is a good example of how we have a center platform station, center running in here, and then there's a lane of traffic on either side for automobiles to go back and forth. So just an existing example of how we fit this in. Next slide, please. So here's some other slides to take a look at here. I'm going to go start at the top left and go clockwise around this, but just want to kind of show how we work within context of the neighborhoods around it. So the top left photo shows is at Hamlin Avenue. We're center running there on University Avenue, and Project Pride for Living housing was built at about the same time we were finishing up construction with the Green Line there. So we worked with the developers on that to coordinate their development and utilities and how it fit within the context of what we were building through that area. The top center photo is University Avenue, University of Minnesota Washington Avenue, where the train is going down Washington Avenue, and this is a good example of how we had to mitigate for traffic. So folks may remember prior to Green Line being in there, University Avenue through the campus was pretty much gridlocked going through there during rush hour. It was a little bit hazardous as a student crossing the road through there to, you know, get across traffic and dodge everything coming through there. Well, with running the train through there, that's now a transit mall. So buses and trains run down there. There's bike lanes that go down there, and emergency vehicles can go through, but it's a lot more pedestrian friendly now for folks, especially the high volume of pedestrians going through the middle of the campus. But to do that work, we had to mitigate for that traffic, to bring them around the campus, to bring all the vehicle traffic coming off the Washington Avenue Bridge around the campus to still be able to get to where they're going to, but off of Washington Avenue. And that's been a pretty successful project, or element of that project. Top right-hand side is center running through a residential area. This is very narrow right-of-way through here. It's Minnehaha Avenue over by the VA. The right-of-way here is about 66 feet, so we get a lane of traffic in each direction with sidewalks on either side of it. And it's in this shot, you can see it's more residential through this area. As we go down, the bottom right is just a photo of us running through downtown Minneapolis. So we're in that downtown, heavy urban area operating. The bottom middle is just another view from the other direction of Prospect Park Station. So you can see how the station comes out and then turns up onto University Avenue through this intersection. And then the bottom left here is just a good photo showing University Avenue at Victoria and the station located in that area. And you can see that this is more of a residential area on University Avenue. So just different places and how we operate and run through there. So it's really meant to be a higher overview, but just kind of talk a little bit about our existing elements and in our existing system out there and answer some of the questions you have and maybe cause a lot more questions. So any conversation or questions? Well, great.
Dan answered all those questions earlier on, Nick.
Well, this group will have more. I know it. So
I know. Why don't we go ahead and move into the next section here, and which I do think we'll have some good questions and good conversation going on. So wanted to provide the advisory committee tonight an update on where we are on working on some of the activities that we have talked about in terms of anti-displacement and equitable development, and also kind of previous commitments. So Sophia, if we can move to the next slide. Just a reminder, Dan and Nick is really talking about a lot of the technical aspects of our project: stations, track, right-of-way, parking, traffic, bike lanes, all of that. We also know that in companion to our project, we need to also be having conversation about community benefits, equitable development. How do we provide an opportunity for continued community project? How do we address anti-displacement and gentrification? And also, our commitment is making sure that our communities, particularly in Golden Valley and our neighborhoods on also Memorial Highway, with the previous alignment, we did bring investments that promoted safety, that promoted community continuity, that promoted kind of the ease of transportation as well, and that we don't leave those behind, but we continue to work on realizing what those investments are. So tonight, just wanted to give the committee here an update on some of the conversations we've been having with your partners on the Business Advisory Committee. Feedback that we've received from folks around this virtual table, as well as some of the stakeholders as we begin to think about how we begin to address some of these pretty hefty issues, but ones that are super important to the success of this project. And in a lot of our community members' minds, just kind of like we need to be talking about it before we can really maybe even move forward on some aspects of the project. So as we spoke in April and shared with you, we understand that us at the council or our partners over at Hennepin County, sometimes we bring a little trauma and baggage to some of these conversations. And, really, are we the best folks to lead these discussions? And folks have really confirmed with us is we really need to bring a third party in, one that can facilitate the conversations, help us navigate the conversations. We are definitely a participant. We are definitely an implementer. We definitely need to support the work, but we shouldn't be leading it. So I think that has been confirmed from our community members, that a third-party facilitator that also is a bit of an expert or a subject matter expert about community wealth building, anti-displacement, gentrification, things like that, can bring context to the conversation, both locally so that they're grounded locally in our experiences and what has worked, what has been positive, what we need to continue to work on, what are the tools that exist, and then also can potentially pull in some national conversations as well from other areas. We understand, and we heard it a lot over actually in a few meetings this week, is that there is a strong interest to convene this work as, convene this working group as soon as possible. We understand for some community members, you know, they want to know what we're doing about gentrification, anti-displacement before they can potentially even weigh in on a West Broadway or a Lowry. So we're hearing that and we're trying to work as fast as we can. So I'll talk a little bit about what those next steps are. We had shared with you in part of your packet of what Sophia shared with you last night are some examples of what definitions could be around displacement. So in your packet had the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs. They had worked on a definition with some of our kind of researchers in the area. The Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, and I don't know, Catherine, if you want to talk a little bit about that too, but there's a definition on what displacement is. We also shared with you a couple of national examples from California and from Austin. And I think if folks haven't had a chance to just review some of that, take a look at that, because Austin actually begins to break down displacement a little bit even more finite and talking about direct displacement, indirect displacement, and cultural displacement. So some of this does sound a little wonky. I think what we're hoping is that we can come up with a local definition that really resonates with community in terms of what displacement and gentrification is. So as we begin to research and kind of bring some of that forward, we want to bring that to our stakeholders and kind of share and begin to get a little bit of our arms around what a common language could be in these areas. Just some additional feedback. Folks understand this is pretty complicated, that there aren't any easy solutions. We want to give it the time and the space that it needs, so we're trying to honor that feedback. We also recognize there are many, many, many organizations who work in this area in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, and we want to tap into that and bring that into the conversations as well. And clearly we heard from our folks that this requires a commitment from the project. And I just want to say from the project team that's here today and from the council and Hennepin County, our policymakers, you've got that commitment from us. We will be talking about this and you will be engaged through the process. So maybe Sophia, we can move to the next slide. So slide 32, we've just broken down some of the potential names that our advisory committee members, both from folks around the table tonight and our business advisory committee, the cohort group that Sophia talked about, and some of our kind of other peer groups, stakeholders have shared with us, like what are some good examples that they've experienced in this work, or people that they know of, or of organizations that could potentially lead some of these. What we're doing is collecting that and just kind of sharing with you what we're hearing. But as we develop this scope of work, and I'll talk a little bit about what that would be, that we're making sure all of the folks that work in this area know about our work to do this, pulling a working group together, that it's connected with this project, and that we're definitely tapping our local resources so that they're aware of this work going on. So you see Trust for Public Land, locally the Center for Economic Inclusion, which has done a lot of great work on equity and wealth building, the Alliance, also some nonprofit groups here, even the Chamber, even our Blue Line Coalition that we have representatives from, where they've developed actually an equity and development scorecard. So kind of building on some of the information that has come together in other areas. And of course, the University of Minnesota through a couple of different of their research areas. So just wanted to share with you tonight a bit of that list. We're going to continue to build this list. So we're, again, making sure we're connecting. Sophia, if we can maybe move to the next. So one of the questions we've been getting is like, well, where does this working group you know, where do they do their work and how is it related to advisory committees? How is it related to the corridor management committee and community works? And also our cities that we're working with and agency partners and community partners. I don't think this is the final graphic, but what we're trying to convey is that this work is connected in everything that we do with our advisory committees. So as the working group gets together and they begin to develop work product, it is our hope and wish and intent that they're bringing that as draft information to the community, the committees that we have and our stakeholders, and receiving feedback and kind of moving that through the process. To accomplish a couple of things. One, that they're getting that direct feedback from our advisory committees, and that two, that you can also see how that work is moving forward and have an opportunity to help shape that and put some really good community thought behind it as well. So this isn't the ultimate graphic, I think, but the point that we're trying to convey is that this work will continue to move forward. It will be connected with the work that we're doing on the technical side as well, and it will also have a connection to our advisory committees. And so the other piece that we'll try to explore and getting a little bit of feedback too from community members is kind of like, how big is this group? We know that there's a lot of interest, and who sits on that? So we're hoping that our facilitator will kind of help us a little bit to find what that sort of optimal size is, knowing that there is that review and comment and share with our advisory committees. But our hope is that it's a nice working group that logistically makes sense. It also really is intended for sharing the work with other groups. And maybe there might be an opportunity where if it is a little bit of a larger group, it might break down into some like specific areas. Maybe there's a concentrated area on gentrification. Maybe there's an area on anti-displacement. Maybe there's an area that is specifically more interested folks getting around community wealth building and kind of bringing that all together. So again, we don't have the right size. We don't have maybe all of the members identified yet, but we're working towards that. And again, just talking a little bit about the role of the facilitator and just reinforcing that it is an organization and or person that really does come with some good local experience and understand the partners and again, the tools and really building to success. So the next slide just shows again some of the organizations we've heard from our stakeholders who should be around the table. So you see some of our agencies there, definitely representatives from our community advisory committee, our business advisory committee, some other community experts, our corridor cities, clearly the private sector and some economic development experts, affordable housing, some of our community partners that are already doing this work, bringing some of that academic research arm to this as well. And we keep asking when we're in different spaces, are there other organizations or other community groups that should also be included as we think about what this is. So what we're doing is pulling that together and wanting to share that, like, here's who, as we've asked the question, our different stakeholders think should be around the table, so we can confirm that as we go forward. Next slide. So just to kind of recap, we're gathering those list of organizations and stakeholders that should be included in those conversations. Again, beginning to help fill out to think about who's around that virtual table of that working group. Carry forward some discussions about definitions and case studies, and we'll talk a little bit about Central Corridor tonight, and really bring in some of that initial local and national work that can help the working group kind of move forward so they don't have to spend some time right off the bat doing that we're preparing them and providing that information forward. Drafting a request for proposal to find a convener who can help us with this work. That is something that we're working on right now, and our thought is once we get that into draft form, that we would be sharing it with you all so you can take a look at that. We can have a discussion at it at our June meeting, and we can get your input on really kind of the roles and responsibilities and how that can come together. So you'll get that ahead of time so you have some time to react to it so we can have a great discussion when we get together. And then outside of this work, we are not just leaving this work only up to the working group. We will continue to talk about anti-displacement and gentrification and wealth building through our project goals and evaluation criteria. They find their way in a lot of the work that we're doing and even some of the technical work. So just know that we don't see this as something that's just a satellite and off. It's definitely connected to our work, and so we'll be engaging on that as well. Just real quickly, we'll be talking about this in June with you when we have a draft request for proposals. Our hope is that after we receive your input, that we can produce a final and put that out. And again, all those stakeholders, definitely be connecting with them and at those different networks to make sure folks know this work is out. And really looking forward to having some really good proposals come on in so we can take a look at that. And as I said, we'll continue to engage community on anti-displacement as we move forward. So I'm going to hold right there and just see if there's any questions or any comments from our committee members before we move on.
You know, I have a lot of questions, Sam.
Yes, Catherine.
Of course. There's two questions. One, who's going to decide after the RFP has been submitted and you get proposals? Are we voting on it, or you're going to decide? Who's going to decide? And second,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, what's their goal? I mean, what are they trying to do? Just do some documentation, or are there some action items that are going to come out of this particular group? What's their ultimate goal?
Yeah, Catherine. So our hope, you know, a lot of what we do, we like to do things partnerships. So I think when those proposals come in, we would definitely see a role for some of our agency staff to be reviewing that. I would totally anticipate and expect that we would have representatives from our business advisory committee and our community advisory committee as well on that review or provide input on that. I think that would be good of us to have. And we would really love to see the world through your eyes on this and receive that input. So that is something we haven't formalized, but kind of just as we've been rolling around in our heads of how that would come together. There's probably some other community groups or experts too that we would like to have. Part of that is seeing the proposals of like who presents, and then we can also reach out to some other organizations, and if they haven't proposed, maybe that they're also sitting on a review committee because they are subject matter experts and can kind of help with that review.
And to me, they're not experts unless they've been displaced.
Gotcha. Understood. And we understand that there's a lot of research folks too that have spent some time understanding that and talking to folks that have been displaced, whether it's been residential or business as well. So there might be a role for them as we take a look at those proposals. I think your question is like, what is the role of this group? Kind of what is their charge? Is really to help us identify and develop policies that prevent displacement, that prevent gentrification, that really, you know, focuses on community wealth building with the opportunity that we have with the Blue Line. We know that there's organizations doing a lot of this work. You know, Hennepin County has tools, the council has tools, the city has tools, different organizations have tools, but we haven't like maybe used our tools together. So this group would come together and take a look at that. Do we have the right tools? What can we actually implement and actually bring those implementable policies forward? So whether you're at the city or at the council or at the county, that we can actually be working together to arrive at the same destination with it. And I think it's been very clear, and I think, Dan, you could probably share this as well in terms of the Hennepin County policymakers. We don't want to study this anymore. We need to get to actual tools that can fit in the toolbox that we can work as we think about the Blue Line and moving forward and building this, but building it in such a way that honors the community's vision for development.
Well, I would hope that you would start with at least the premise that some person or some business will be displaced. So we're not going to prevent it. we can minimize it. But if your
Mhm.
expectation is we're going to prevent it, I'm not sure if that's a feasible expectation, but we'll see.
Good point, Catherine. Understood. Yep. That's it, Catherine? Just 2?
Just for now. I didn't
For now,
bother.
okay.
I didn't bother Nick, so I mean, I'm usually all over.
That's all right. I know there will be more questions, more comments, more thoughts about the work that we're doing, or obviously we'll talk more about this in June when we have that request for a proposal, and I think it will provide that framework of what is this organization going to be doing, how are they going to be doing it, and again, getting your thoughts on what's the best way for us to go about that too. Okay, if it's the pleasure of the chairs, we'll just keep moving on. And just wanted to talk a little bit of some of the questions we've been asked at the business as well as the community advisory committees. Like, well, what has happened with development, and what has been the experience here for the region? So I just want to talk a little bit at a very high level of some of the trends, a couple of points that we've seen on Central Corridor, and also offer up to the group that we could probably spend a week, we could probably spend 40 hours talking about the Central Corridor experience. And we definitely want to have those conversations with you. We would like to bring other voices into this so we can bring some of the numbers, but sometimes the numbers only mean certain things, and the numbers really need to come alive when you can hear the experience of a business owner or somebody who lived along the corridor or somebody who was help organizing. To talk about anti-displacement and support. So this is meant to just be a high-level conversation. Our intent and hope is that we can bring some of those folks so you all can have a conversation with them and they can kind of share their experience. So just at a high level, when we take a look at our high-frequency transit service, so that if you think back to the map that Nick shared that has our light rail system, our ABRT system, and kind of also if you add some of our high frequency local bus service, over the last 17 years, $14 billion in development has been permitted near those transit lines. If you think about that, that's pretty amazing because that also represents 35% of all the regional development in the last 17 years are along those high frequency transit development, which is great, and a good portion of that, so this represents private investment, public investment, residential, commercial. A good portion of that $9 billion has been located within 1/2 mile of LRT stations. And then when we look at the number of multifamily units permitted near LRT stations, it's over 20,000 units out of 34,000. Now this is for the whole region, so it's pretty exciting, but it also begins to identify that tension that we have about when we make these investments into transportation, that the development pressures also begin to come in as well. So when we built Hiawatha, a lot of development sort of lagged because one of the reasons is like, well, let's just make sure this region can build the light rail. And then once it was open, a lot of the development followed. With Green Line, that wasn't the case. Folks saw that line and they really wanted to be a part of that transportation investment and started building basically kind of right of way. With Green Line extension, we're seeing that right now. We haven't actually placed 1 inch of light rail, and there's over $1 billion investment on that. And with the previous line, and it's what we hear from communities, as folks begin to develop on the Blue Line extension with about $500 million worth of investment. So we begin to see that folks see the attraction, they want to be a part of that. So the first set of numbers are permitted, and looking ahead in terms of plan, very much the same trend. Almost 70% of the planned development is going to be near these high frequency transit corridors, a good portion of that being near LRT stations as well. So talk a little bit about Green Line, kind of our central corridor, our most recent experience in building this, and what we're seeing is that regionally the line is a success in terms of ridership. overall development, especially when you're bookended by downtown St. Paul and downtown Minneapolis. You have a lot of the development that really kind of overshadows some of the corridor there, and job growth. So just a couple of points on each, some data facts to kind of help folks think about the success of this, not the only metrics, but just wanted to share a little bit with you all in terms of ridership. So when the planners were kind of putting pen to paper and thinking about what the projected ridership would be and looking at the numbers, in the year 2030, they were thinking about 41,000 average weekday rides. In 2018, we actually surpassed that. So well ahead of the projected ridership, 2018, over 42,000 rides, which is pretty exciting and quite a success. And Dan can tell you a lot of our national folks kind of are calling up and like, how did that happen? Why are you guys such a success in being able to kind of tell that story? That's what happens when you connect two downtowns, a university, employment, the capital. A lot of good things begin to happen there. The corridor has also become more diverse in terms of who lives there. So we've been able to see the numbers increase in terms of diversity and representation of our residents. In terms of employment during construction, so like the actual construction contracts, there are goals for employment for women and minorities. For women, the goal was 6%, and when the project was done, it was actually hit 7%. For minorities, the goal was 18% and actually 19%. And just so folks are aware, Southwest also has goals, and they're higher than what you see here. So for women, it's 20% now for the Southwest LRT project, and for our BIPOC communities, it's 32%. So again, this increase of making sure that the folks that live in these corridors can also work in these corridors as well from construction and even before that. There's also a great attempt to make sure that all of our businesses that work in the construction trades are also part of the success of this project. So contracting with disadvantaged businesses, the goal for these civil contracts were 15%, and actually 18% was achieved. For Minnesota specifically, that was almost $120 million coming to our local contractors. For Southwest, that goal is 16%, and about $100 million has come into our local DBEs as well. So moving on to the next slide. There was a great effort to make sure that businesses along the corridor stayed. We're also able to weather a little bit of the construction impacts. We're not going to run away from that. There's definitely impacts during construction. But I just wanted to share with you a little bit about what that looked like and kind of what that program. So as some folks know, while we were in construction for Central, we were kind of in that economic downturn. We were slowly getting out of it. So some businesses took that opportunity with kind of lower construction rates, lower materials to say, we're going to make some improvements to our own building. Some did that outright. Some did that with help with some loans. There were some grants to just provide help in making facades. Lots of training and technical assistance at the local level and to make that happen as well. So a good number of businesses really took that opportunity to say, hey, I was going to plan to expand or do some other improvements. I'm just going to do it during construction. About 200 businesses were aided by about a $4 million kind of ready for rail forgivable loans. Again, to kind of get them and carry them through the construction time. And here's, I think, sort of the piece that is that sort of that myth buster, I think, that we like to share with folks. 128 street level businesses open fronting the Green Line during the 4-year construction period. And that's actually 13 more than closed or relocated. So even during construction, there were businesses that definitely closed for one reason or another, or some relocated, but ultimately there was a net gain of businesses that opened during construction. So our next steps, as we shared with you, is that we can provide the facts, but there's so many good stories behind the actual experience, and we want to bring that local perspective. So hopefully with the co-chair's permission, we can bring some of those speakers in, some of the business owners. In particular, we have a business owner that now sits on the Met Council, and that's Council Member Chris Ferguson. Somebody who went through this and was impacted, and actually one of the reasons why he even wanted to serve on the council is to bring that perspective as a business owner who lived through construction, to make sure we're doing the right things on the next projects. We want to love to bring in some of the perspectives of the local residents as they live through construction. A lot of this work was done because we had great community organizers and bring in their perspective as well, and some of the policy makers. Some hard decisions were definitely needed to be made, and how do we support our communities through this and kind of share that perspective. So again, we would be happy to work with our co-chairs to design a program that we can bring some folks in and have some further discussions with that. So I'll hold there and just see if there's any comments or any questions on what we've just shared.
I have a couple comments or questions that kind of go back to what we were talking about before, and this, and what I've talked about in the past. I want to make sure that we don't forget about what didn't work, and making sure that people understand that we've learned from previous experiences in order to build trust, and making sure people know that we're trying to engage with the community and not displace people and businesses and things that sometimes do get displaced, whether we like it or not. Now, you mentioned 128 businesses were built and 115 businesses were closed. So you still had a net gain in businesses. Now, has anybody gone back to see why those 113 businesses closed? Not all of them closed because of rail. Some of them closed because of economic downturns, and I understand all of that. But if there could be some sort of breakdown and explanation as to what happened and what can be done in the future to make sure, if it was directly impacted by rail, how that could be mitigated or further mitigated, I think it would be helpful for future engagement and future trust building.
Yeah, absolutely, Giuseppe. And we're trying to put some of our hands on that. There are a couple of reports that have been done by the Wilder Foundation that begin to quantify a little bit, kind of go and talk to some of those owners as to why exactly. So that's exactly what we want to be able to bring forward and share those perspectives as well, because I think you're absolutely right. It's like, how do we not repeat the things that didn't work well, right? We shouldn't be doing that, and focus on the pieces. I would say by being able to bring a gentrification working group is one of those things that we're learning to do better. You know, that wasn't, for example, that is not something that we have on the Southwest Corridor even today. Mm-hmm. That we're going to bring that conversation early on with Blue Line.
And yeah, just like, I'm sorry, just like Nicole just put in the chat, were those BIPOC businesses that came back, or were they of a different ethnic background? But I want to get more specific, the guidelines and the eligibility for the businesses for the Green Line. I think we need to talk about that and revisit that for some that were not able to meet this eligibility for them to get the business interruption loans or whatever name you wanted to put on them. In addition, the businesses need to have some level of auxiliary training. I mean, it came to light that a lot of them, because they were small, maybe one person, they didn't have the accounting or the financial background to even estimate what their losses would be if they closed down the business. So I think there's a need for community support and auxiliary services for the businesses in order for them to make more educated decisions and be more actively involved in what's going on. They're so busy trying to run the business, they may not have the time or even the expertise to provide us with the information that we might need to even help them. So the criteria that was used for businesses in order to be eligible, I think we need to revisit that. And also, signage and access during construction was a big issue for the businesses as well. So that was a little slack. So I guess the bottom line is, how much money do you have in order to help these businesses not only during construction, but starting out right now, as far as services and support that they need during this process?
Right, Catherine, it's a good question. You know, right now we don't have anything, right? And that's what we're trying to do with a little bit of that work. I mean, we've been hearing that, and it's probably one of the failures of our, you know, with our work with the previous alignment of not building that earlier on into the process. So I think you're dead on that there's things that we could be doing about technical assistance and getting out there and offering. And I know like Hennepin County has done some really good work in that area and begin to kind of concentrate that a little bit more. But then I agree with you, the work is making sure we've got the resources to support our community businesses and residents.
Yeah, I
I guess I'm kind of curious from a just like as a committee to have a conversation quickly. I know we're just getting this information and we don't have a ton of time left, but just, I mean, there have been some really good questions and some points that have been brought up about this displacement, sort of the idea of how this project is going to address some of those concerns. And I guess as a conversation to the committee, do we feel like this is directionally, I mean, in the little bits that I've been involved with things before, I haven't ever really seen anything like this. So I feel like this is, from my opinion, there might need to be more details, but it seems like this is a good idea that we're having this conversation and that we're making some headway in this direction on the project. But I'm curious, as a committee, do we feel like this isn't even scratching the surface? Is this directionally good? Or do we feel like the team is on the right track? Because at some point, you know, we're going to get brought in, there's going to be more done, and I feel like we're right at the front end here. So do we feel like this is the right way to be thinking about it, or are we totally missing the mark? I guess, and that's just like an open question to ask for feedback from the committee. And maybe there isn't any. Does anybody have any feedback on that? As a, just, you know, like raise your hand, or just if you think like yes or no, yes, raise your hand if you think like this is directionally where we're trying to head, or don't raise your hand and say like, no, we're way off the mark here. What's being brought to us is missing.
I think this is a start.
I understand the question, Jason.
You don't understand the question?
Yeah. Are you asking whether or not this committee should be talking about Andy's displacement, or should be just for the group that's going to be hired, or?
No. I mean, me personally, I feel like we should definitely be talking about displacement, and I think it's a good idea that it's coming up in this context. And Giuseppe, I know you're just about to talk, but just to answer Catherine's question really quick, yeah, I mean, I feel like this directionally is great, but I'm only one person, and I'm curious. We're a whole committee here. There's a bunch of people, and I'm wondering, like, are we heading in the right direction? Are these the things we should be talking about when it comes to displacement? Or should we be telling the team, like, there needs to be a much deeper dive here before we even like get to some of these decisions? Or I don't have the answer. I'm wondering, like, we're a big group. That's why we're here. Like, let's have some opinions on what this is and what does this mean for us?
I see. Thanks.
Hi. I don't know. I don't know how to raise my hand in this Cisco WebEx. But my name is Nicole Bueller, and I'm the executive director for the Harrison Neighborhood Association. I also live in the Hawthorne neighborhood. And I think that your question, Jason, about like, is this enough, is a really valid question in terms of like, what are we talking about in terms of anti-displacement? We're also part of the, Harrison is a partner in the community engagement cohort, and we had the same presentation earlier today, where it was revealed that it looks like any of the anti-displacement policies that are going to be coming forward from the anti-displacement policy table would not be implemented until after the line is actually selected. And we know from Harrison's experience that it's too late at that point. Once the route is selected, you see the process of gentrification kicking off in a way where property values increase. In our case, they increased by 60% within 2 years of the announcement of the line. Speculators moving in, buying up properties, displacing people, development happening that, creating developments that are not actually affordable for people in the area. And so without these things in place and guaranteed up front, the policies that are needed have to be in place before the line gets selected, and the investments need to be made up front. And so if the process that we're looking at is such that we're asked as a community to support a line that will ultimately lead to our community's displacement, I think we need as a community to be saying, hold up, we're not going to agree to anything until we have these things in place up front to make sure that this is going to be a project that actually benefits our communities and doesn't actually lead to our displacement. And I'd be happy to have a conversation about the experience of Harrison with anyone that's interested in learning more about that. But yeah, those are the right questions to be asking. And the timeline to me seems like it's off, because we know we need these things first, or the people that are going to benefit are not the people that are living here now or doing business here now.
Thanks for that.
I'd like to interject and say that it's a start, and I know that we should have started this a long time ago, but I think we need to just be aware that this is more than what we've ever done in the past. I think we should be doing more, but I also want to make sure that we have a little bit of humility and realize that we've made mistakes in the past, and we need to be able to admit the mistakes that we've made in the past in order to garner trust and for people to realize that we're not doing this just to make ourselves feel better. We're doing this because it's the right thing to do. And I think that's why I keep hitting the same point of saying, I don't want to see a bunch of slides over the success of all these projects and how good we were with all the businesses. I think we also need to realize, here's who we displaced, here's why they were displaced, and here's the problems we've had in the past. And we admit that it was a problem and we need to move forward and do something better about it. And here's our proposed solution. Will you work with us?
So Giuseppe, some good points, and I think, and Nicole saying similarly, those are all good points. When I ever think about, the topics of displacement, I think about it much broader than, because I think about, well, what about the issue of what I would call direct displacement, meaning what Catherine referred to a little bit earlier. Will there be properties, businesses, homes, residential properties, whatever they may be, that are displaced, if you will, because we come up with a design that results in acquisition of right-of-way that relocates or purchases those properties? There's a kind of that's a topic of displacement. Then there's one we just spent a whole bunch of time talking about, which is the topic of displacement caused by, or potentially caused, or maybe caused by construction itself. Impacts to traffic, impacts to access, impacts to, the conditions caused by. And there, Giuseppe, I know I can point to things that we did very poorly in year one that we really expounded on in year two. For example, knowing that when you're digging up in and around people's front doors, you have to have, built out of wood, accessible accesses in the doorways all the time. You can't make people walk through construction zones. And it was a war zone out there in 2011, and it was way better in 2012. So there's an example of some lessons learned, how we could do things better. But then there's the displacement that's harder to sometimes wrap our arms around, and that's the displacement that Nicole talks about, which is when the knowledge of potentially investing in various areas potentially causes changes in home ownership values and property values and how that impacts people. And that's one that's really hard to wrap your arms around. You know, one way you could avoid that is don't make the investment. Well, that's not what we're trying to do, right? We're not trying to not invest so that property values stay low. At the same time, we are trying to formally build a light rail line to serve existing North Minneapolis, existing Robbinsdale, existing Crystal, and the improvements that can come along with it. So we really got to look at each of those 3, 4, 5 different areas, and we've got to identify them. Some of them will be strategies imposed in how to help businesses during construction. Some will be strategies around how to minimize right-of-way acquisition, but some will certainly be strategies around how do we keep properties affordable and keep people living where they are in their neighborhoods while we bring a significant investment to them and for them.
And Dan, if I could just maybe add to that, and Giuseppe, you have a really good point. Like what we shared tonight was just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many more stories. In particular, what's surprising for folks, and this, we have been open about this, and maybe we need to be more open about it. It's only been in, I think, in a couple studies, but talk a little bit about from 2010 to 2015, we have actually lost affordable housing along the Green Line. You know, so there was actually like a 5% loss of about affordable housing. Part of that is because it also incorporated downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul and a lot of the market rate in kind of even luxury housing that occurred in those downtowns. So that really did sort of overshadow that. But to that 5%, that means something. And maybe that number is actually higher, right? And to what I hear from your question is, how do we get in front of that so we can have affordable housing, keep people where they are, and provide different choices for housing in the corridor, right? It should be an and versus this or that. It should probably be an and, so we have a mix. So the lesson that we hope to drive to, and it kind of gets back to Catherine's question, is how do we provide for that whole scope and that whole range, but not do any harm or minimize as much harm as we know some of these projects do bring.
If you got Jason.
Yeah, Brett, go ahead.
Thank you. I think we always jump into these conversations deep, head deep into the water and everything else, but we're trying to do this in 2 hours, take on the world in 2 hours, which is always a difficult proposition. So one, let's cut ourselves just a little bit of slack on this one. But 2 major things I want to point out. I think we always look at it from the wrong lens. We look at it from the deficit situation as opposed to what are the opportunities and the possibilities. How can we put the initial investment up first that really provides that hope and opportunity for those who are there? We look at it from, we know we're going to lose it. Well, maybe not, because we haven't really broken the box yet when it comes to these type of projects. We can reimagine how, to help the businesses in a certain way that actually helps them stay. They may not be, there's other ways that we can think about it, but we have to give ourselves a chance, to be able to say to the community, this is going to be in the greatest interest, because it's going to provide that opportunity for us to bring in more people, to bring in new opportunities. And working with the cities, working with the state and others, let's do that upfront investment that is going to ensure that a community that always gets left behind, that we give them the necessary support to start the process, as opposed to, I think we, I watched the Green Line, with some interest. And again, I have family over there. And the biggest thing that they kept going into us was they kept selling us short. And we had to fight for every simple little thing, as opposed to saying, what is that upfront investment that really just locks it down and gives us some chance? We have gone through a lot over the past year that we've also reimagined how we finance ourselves. We can actually do that necessary investment to not just mitigate, but to actually create an opportunity to thrive. I think if we go with that mindset of how do we thrive as opposed to how do we just survive, I think that's really going to set us, in a different direction as opposed to what's always happened.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Brett.
So again, we're a big group here. I don't know if there's other people that want to join this conversation or have opinions. I think the more people that talk, the better off we are as a group. So, you know, we've got a few minutes left. I would say, like, if there's, I mean, it's not like there's people yelling, so we can maybe have a few more people talk, and then.
Jason, there's some good pieces in the chat too. There's some good pieces in the chat that are there. Especially, I want to highlight something that Peggy Sue brought up that I also heard from Councilmember Ellison the other day as we had a meeting, and what we talked about was not so much about gentrification may be a benefit if the people that benefit from it are the people, you know, not outside developers that come in, but are the people in the neighborhood itself. So people who have been here, people who live in the neighborhoods, if they're profiting from the investments that we're making, then why isn't that a good thing? And I hear that from a lot of folks too. Let's let the people who've been here benefit from the investment that we're making.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that we talked about when we had the combined CAC BAC too, was the Women from West Broadway Coalition kind of saying, you know, like, we're really ready for this, you know, we want this. And I think I get really, defensive isn't the best word, but it's like, you know, how do we talk about in transit as an investment and not always about gentrification? Because I think that gentrification is such a complicated word. It's not even really my favorite word, right? Because I just think it's so much more nuanced than it often gets described as. And so, you know, I don't know. I think that displacement is the goal of what we're trying to not do, but investment, whether that's, you know, for business owners or for, you know, what we know is that, you know, Black majority areas are undervalued. Property values are not the same. My house, if it was in South Minneapolis, would be worth 3 times what it is worth. So, well, you know, that could be really good, right? In the long term, if a lot of, you know, Black and brown homeowners have higher property values, that is a way that they build wealth. Like, that can be really good. So I think that, you know, this is all to sort of say that, like, I just hope that we focus not necessarily on gentrification or like investment in the community, because we want those things. But as we do those things, like, who gets to benefit from that, and who are the people, you know, whether that's on the construction side of things and making sure that there's lots of, you know, Black and brown folks who are employed through this process, and making sure that, like, land acquisitions are really fair, and making sure that, like, new development goes priority to community groups or to people who are going to develop affordable housing or going to develop opportunities for Black and brown businesses, and then the ways that we protect Black and brown businesses through this process. So I don't know. I hope that we can just shift not from displacement, but also intentional investment. So, because, you know, I think all of us who want that over here want that. We want our community to thrive. So, yeah.
Thanks, Peggy Sue. Brett just asked about, you know, we're not locked to having just one meeting. I think we can have more meetings. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up is, as more of us are getting vaccinated and as things are improving on that front, do we want to think about maybe having an in-person meeting? I don't know if it can be a smaller group or how that's all going to work. Maybe it needs to be outside or whatever, but like to start thinking about, I think it's tough to have these conversations in a weird video, virtual, remote forum. So I think 2 things. One is, like, we need to maybe have a few more conversations more often, because these are big topics, and it's like we talk about it, we have the meeting for 2 hours, and then we meet a month later. It's kind of like we lose that conversation. So maybe, like, have another follow-up on this topic in a few weeks, and I can work with Sophia and Felipe to sort that out. And, you know, if you don't have that time and you can't do it, that's okay too. But the other thing I think to start considering is like, do we want to try to find ways to maybe meet more in person? Because I think that could be really productive for us too.
Yeah, I agree, Jason. It's Felipe that we should, after this call, within 5, 7, 10 days or whatnot, have another follow-up call, because there's, as Brett, said, we've got big topics that we talk about here, and then we wait a month to get back to the group. So I think I'd be open to that. But, a touch point, even if we wanted to just say, here's some of the topics we had, and if there's a small group that wants to get on that, to do that, I'd be in for that as well.
Yeah, I'm allowed to work as many hours a week as I want. So for 40 hours worth of pay. So I'm happy to meet. Sure.
I'll just offer as well, I think Jean suggested it in chat too. We have the facilities at the, actually the Southwest Project Office was kind of a function as our combined project office to have a little bit of both people able to join online in a group gathering in person. Obviously we'd have to be masked. People have to be, indoors, still have to wear masks. But we could have a little bit of that combined setting. And as I think it brought up, we can work with the two co-chairs to have these kind of like special topics, because if you look at our summer and what we're trying to accomplish, there's a lot, and it's a lot of information. It's a lot of deep topics. It's a robust conversation. And the virtual world kind of sucks, right? It's not so fun. It's harder to get into it. So whether it's the anti-displacement or getting into the weeds of, the next two meetings are going to be less presentation and much more visuals and workshopping thoughts. So to the extent that we want to find time to gather with it, and this might have gotten lost a little bit in the discussion too, but I think as staff, what we're trying to really establish right now, whether it's the project itself or the anti-displacement working group, is structures to be successful, to bring money, to be able to have these conversations, to make sure that they're implementable. And so I think, Jason, how you asked the group, like, are we on the right direction? How do we pull this together? Is exactly the point for this moment. So thank you for encouraging, this discussion. Sorry, since I'm rambling and people are probably thinking about what they want to react, we also want to point out now that the July meeting is basically almost right after the holiday. So wanted to start polling the group about shifting 1 week back. So it would be, I believe, Wednesday the 14th instead of the 6th. So just wanted to put that out there as well, as we think of if we want to gather in person partially and whatnot.
I mean, we could think, Sophia, we could think about doing something where this is maybe just a bold suggestion, but if we were to meet twice a month, we could meet once to talk, to kind of focus on technical details, cross sections, impacts, engineering issues, and then meet again another time of the month to focus just on community benefits, displacement, the working group, strategies, solutions, or half and half at each meeting. I mean, you guys can guide us as to what you think is best. We can, as a staff team, adapt to whatever you think works best and try to get ready and provide the material to keep these discussions flowing, because there's nothing, it's one thing to have public engagement, but it's another thing to have, robust public engagement with the kind of discussions that we've been able to have with this group, and that's good.
So I think maybe can we send an email to everybody, send an email to Sophia and just let her know if you're in for one time. I mean, the requirement that everyone signed up for is one a month. And so I feel like we have to have that meeting, and we want that to be, we want to have good conversation, but we also have things that the project team needs to share with us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think letting the team know if you're up for one or two or more, if maybe we could just get a set of responses to Sophia, and then we can figure out, okay, we've got almost everybody wants to meet more than once a month, so let's just do that. And we can just set it up as a group, or hey, it's going to actually be a smaller subset. So we'll figure out like what's the best way to meet together among that smaller group. If that makes, I mean, I think that's like an easy, I know we did that as far as like changing the day of the week, and that worked well. So
yeah, Jason, we can, you know, kind of follow up with the group, because if half the group is cool with twice a month and the half isn't, we can even structure how we think about our discussions. You know, whether that's bringing all the information to one meeting so at least everybody has it, and then follow up discussion, the second meeting kind of focuses just on the discussion and planning and some of those strategic conversations as a committee. We're happy to co-create that structure with you, and I think you kind of said it. The goal is to make sure that people can participate and that we still have a robust attendance at our advisory committee. And then as staff, we can basically respond to that. And, you know, we have formal things like agendas 5 days out and that kind of stuff. And if you have a little bit of flexibility with us on some of that too for an interim meeting, those are all things that we can, you know, push to accommodate the needs and desires of the group.
By the sounds of it, this sounds like one of the most crucial things that we're going to have to deal with.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So I think it's, you know, and maybe just a couple special meetings that we have in the interim, but, you know, but we're going to, for us as a group, but also as we work within our communities, we're going to have to be able to justify what we come up with. And we can't do it in 2 hours a month. It's just not possible. And, you know, and it's okay to say, hey, that's the case. So we have to come up with some other solution, which means increasing the number of hours and go from there.
We're happy to create that space. I think that's so important. Yes.
You're giving this, you know, you guys are giving your time to this. And so we're going to honor that and do what we can to help you be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Jason and Felipe, following up with the request of just if the group can kind of email me in their availability of meeting more frequency. I think we'd target a Wednesday night, right? Just a extra one mid-month. I'll kind of poll how many people say yes to that, so we get a kind of a count, and then I can follow up with the two chairs to kind of do we want May, I was gonna say June, want to meet mid-month, this is May, if we want to schedule another follow-up conversation to this topic that can lead into some of what we're trying to set up for June. You know, and do we want to do this maybe for at least for the summer, kind of confirm that plan a little bit.
Yeah, I think, you know, Brett's point, I think this is going to be a big topic, and we got a lot of work to do and a lot of conversations to have. And so I think until we feel comfortable as a group, like we're getting to where we need to be, then I think it's going to be more meetings. And, you know, once the routes are all decided and all of this information is locked in, then, you know, maybe it is, because it's going to be a little bit more technical. It's going to be about like specific locations and things like that. This is directly, how does this impact our communities? How does this impact the communities around us? So it's, as a community advisory committee, this is going to be probably the most important thing we do. So I'm happy to put in as much time as we need and more meetings, and we're gonna have these conversations and get this right, you know, and put in as much effort to get this right. And I think we've already shown, like just in the handful of people that talked tonight, there's a lot of great opinions and information, you know, people that know things that I don't know and that have different perspectives. And so that's all really important. And that's the whole point of this group. So yeah, I think everyone, if we can send emails to Sophia and let her know our availability. If again, don't feel obligated in the sense that like you have to, like if you can't do it, it's okay. But we want to get as many people as we can engaged in these additional conversations.
And Jason, I would just also, sorry, Sophia, I would just also add that those conversations for those meetings, we'll just make sure that everybody gets a summary of those meetings, right? So if you're not able to attend, at least you've got a sense of the conversation and the issues that were raised and the discussion. So we can definitely commit to that too. We totally appreciate your time, and we know that some folks would rather sometimes be doing some other things. So we don't want to monopolize, but we definitely want to make sure you're in the flow of information as well.
Great, thanks, Sam. All right, well, we're after time here tonight. I think, Felipe, you and I know what we need to do, and we'll work with Sophia to figure those next steps out. But I think we're definitely going to have another meeting this month, and then we'll figure out like what that cadence is going to look like moving forward.
Jason,
go ahead.
if I could add to, if folks are emailing me about their desire, just kind of quick poll of who wants to meet in person. I think that will give us a gauge of, do we want to do something pretty quick, or is it a couple months out, and how staff should push on that. So that would be valuable input from the committee of what folks' comfort level is right now. I think a lot of our staff end, most of us are vaccinated. And we have facilities that we can still do some social distancing, a little full, but that we'd start to accommodate. So that'd be a piece as well. Sam,
Sophia, can we commit to just sending an email out to the whole committee, because we don't have everybody here tonight? So with those two questions, frequency of meeting again, and then comfort level of meeting in person if we take our safety protocols.
Thanks, Sam. I was going to offer that too. We know we had some folks that had dropped off, like Ken earlier in the call, or couldn't make it tonight, that wanted to be here. So we'll definitely make sure the rest of the committee's looped in. And just also want to highlight as staff, what Jason, you just said, and Brett and I had this conversation. Some of the really big decisions and the structure that we put together for this project is happening this year. And so we really want to lead into that and do it right. Okay, all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
That's all. Really appreciate it.